bigger than you think. See beyond what you see. Channel 96, ViuTVSix. Connect the world. The hottest local news, trending international stories, weekly review, topics that affect our communities, in-depth analyses and opinions. All that you need is in one place. Weekly review. Sunday night at 9 on ViuTV6. Provocative stories that have changed lives. Insightful interviews with notable figures from the worlds of news, politics and entertainment. ViuTV6 brings you one of the most esteemed news magazines. ABC News 2020. Sunday night at 9:30 on ViuTV6.
Good evening, I'm Britt, Clennett in Hong Kong and welcome to ViuTV News. Coming up on tonight's show. Villagers in Wong Chau barricading themselves in with roadblocks to stop government officers from resuming land. They're annoying and now the government plans to do something about spam marketing calls. Thousands of people head to Cheung Chau for its annual Bun Festival. To the latest on the Wong Chau housing saga, and villagers set up roadblocks to stop the government from resuming their land for its controversial development project. Residents had truckloads of wooden pallets brought in to create blocks at the entrances of their villages. They vow to stay and safeguard the area. Some have lived there for decades. The latest development comes after the Lands Department posted land resumption notices for development at Wong Chau in Yuen Long, saying the lots must be returned to the government within 3 months.
It's to stop the officers from the Lands Department entering our villages without consensus and disturbing our villages all of a sudden. Villagers get frightened as it was like robbers entering our villages yesterday.
Well, they're a nuisance and always seem to disturb you at exactly the wrong time, but now the government is promising to conduct a public consultation on spam marketing calls. It comes after a woman whose husband needed emergency surgery didn't pick up calls from a hospital. She thought they were from a telemarketer. Commerce Secretary Greg So said there are plans to get people's views on the matter before the current administration's term ends, but he added there's a need to balance the public concerns and companies' interests. Well, Evelina Leung is joining me now for more on that. Well, how have people reacted to the decision?
Well, Britt, as expected, people are welcoming the government's decision with open arms. I mean, I don't know about you, but I get 1 to 2 marketing calls each day, and to be honest with you, it's kind of annoying. So, but many people say it's a bit too late. I mean, there have been calls for the government to regulate these calls since years ago. I mean, back in 2014, the privacy watchdog, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, has called for stricter, controls on marketing calls. But back then, the Commerce Secretary Greg So said that the government had an open attitude but had to consider the interests of the industry and the economy. And he also said that there are people, I mean, there are 20,000 people back then that were working as telemarketers, and they've got to think of these people as well. I mean, if they completely stop these cold calls, these people will be out of a job. But even so, people still call for. People are welcoming today's decision.
Yeah, well, I certainly am, but let's see if something actually gets done about it. Thanks a lot, Evelina. Well, it's that time of the year again when thousands of locals and tourists flock to Cheung Chau for its famous annual Bun Festival. The Transport Department estimates 60,000 visitors will turn out for the event, 5,000 more than last year, thanks to China's mini Golden Week holidays. Little performers for the ViuTVSix, or Floating Colours, parade started dressing up in the morning. Some of them played the roles of Chief Executive-elect Carrie Lam and Nuwa, the Chinese goddess of creation. Tourists also lined up to buy lucky buns. The festival highlight bun scrambling competition will take place at midnight. Looking forward to that. Well, to the US now, and President Donald Trump's nominee to be the US ambassador to China is stirring controversy with strong rhetoric towards China. Terry Branstad criticised Chinese sales of underpriced steel in the global market as unfair and illegal. The Iowa governor said Beijing should be pushing North Korea more to rein in its nuclear program. Pressed on whether the US would impose sanctions on China for doing business with Pyongyang, Branstad said there may well be a role for such measures.
China could play a critical role in convincing North Korea to dismantle its nuclear and missile programs, a strategic policy that would boost the security of America, China, and the entire world. I would hope that recent events has convinced China that they need to take this much more seriously.
Meantime, the president's national security advisor has described his boss's foreign policy approach as disruptive ahead of his meeting with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. To clarify, he added his unconventional ways could actually help to stabilise the Middle East. Palestinian officials were less optimistic about the visit, though. The new US administration is yet to outline a cohesive strategy for restarting long-stalled peace talks. Although Trump has asked Israel to put unspecified limits on its building of Jewish settlements on land the Palestinians want for a state.
We don't expect anything from this visit because the American positions are clear positions and fully biased for the Zionist entity. And this American administration denies even the simplest meanings of what is called the peace process.
Russian President Vladimir Putin welcomes German counterpart Angela Merkel to Sochi, but relations between the two remain strained. Rosanna Philpott reports.
The tense body language perhaps says it all. German Chancellor Angela Merkel being welcomed on a rare visit to Russia by President Vladimir Putin. The pair met in the Black Sea resort of Sochi for talks ahead of the G20 summit. Ties have been strained between Moscow and Berlin on issues including the conflict in Syria and Ukraine. This is Merkel's first trip to Russia since the annexation of Crimea in 2014. She called on all sides to work towards a ceasefire in the region.
Es fehlt an der Umsetzung und nicht an Abkommen.
What's missing is an implementation, not an agreement, and all sides are extremely challenged. For me, the key, and this is also my urgent plea to the Russian president, is to do everything possible to achieve a ceasefire.
Germany's been a driving force behind the EU sanctions on Russia in response to the Ukrainian crisis. She says there are serious differences of opinion. The Russian leader, meanwhile, unhappy at suggestions that Moscow might meddle in the upcoming German election.
We never interfere in the political life and political processes of other countries, and we would very much like it if nobody interfered in the political life of Russia too.
The two will meet again when Merkel hosts Putin at July's G20 meeting in Hamburg. Few expect the body language to be any warmer by the summer.
Well, the French runoff presidential election is just 4 days away, but supporters of the ousted candidates are still deciding who will earn their votes. According to a new survey, about a third of those faithful to far-left candidate Jean-Luc Mélenchon will vote for centrist Emmanuel Macron, while the remainder said they'll cast a blank ballot. Polls show Macron is set to win by about 60% against far-right candidate Marine Le Pen. But in order for that to happen, he needs to earn a chunk of the 20% of Mélenchon's first-round votes. There's plenty at stake for the country on Sunday, with France's future in the European Union hanging in the balance.
There are a lot of political parties who are calling on people to vote against her, so I think there will be enough votes to stop her from winning the second round. But perhaps I'm wrong. You never know. But in any case, I'm sure that afterwards I'll be out in the streets with all the different laws that will be implemented, whoever is elected.
UK Prime Minister Theresa May played up her reputation as a, quote, bloody difficult woman following reports of a prickly dinner with European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. On the campaign trail in Cornwall, May made it clear that if she were to win the leadership elections on June the 8th, she would be as stubborn with Brexit negotiations as she was with Juncker last week. After their meeting at her Downing Street home, Juncker is reported to have called May deluded, something May shrugged off as Brussels gossip.
I think what we've seen recently is that at times these negotiations are going to be tough. Now, during the Conservative Party leadership campaign, I was described by one of my colleagues as a bloody difficult woman. And I said at the time, the next person to find that out will be Jean-Claude Juncker.
Coming up next, the latest from the world of business. Starting with Wall Street market action overnight, and all eyes were on the tech sector as heavyweight players like Apple reported on revenues. But as Fred Kariyama reports, the numbers disappointed and showed Apple is facing challenges ahead.
Apple shares fell after hours. The company reported a surprise drop in quarterly iPhone sales, selling 50.8 million phones. Its revenue rose less than expected, and Apple's revenue forecast fell shy of analysts' expectations. Earlier, tech and industrial stocks helped lift Wall Street, but investors made small moves ahead of Apple's results and the conclusion of the Federal Reserve's two-day policy meeting. U.S. Bank's Eric Wiegand.
I think it's a little bit of consolidation, still a bunch of big data points to gain over the course of the remainder of the week. Certainly the Fed meeting, getting those comments tomorrow.
Auto stocks skidding after automakers reported a sharp drop in vehicle sales in April. GM sales fell 6%, Ford's sank more than 7%. Coach shares soaring. The handbag maker's quarterly profit rose nearly 9% after Coach cut back on discounting in the U.S. and sold pricier bags. Advanced Micro Devices shares plummeted. The chip maker's revenue rose sharply, but investors fretted over its weak forecast for gross margins. In Europe, healthy corporate earnings powered shares higher. Financial and industrial stocks led the pack.
Microsoft has unveiled a streamlined version of its popular operating system geared toward low-cost laptops for students. Windows 10S is priced from $999 and will be available for pre-order starting Tuesday. The offering comes as Microsoft reported third quarter revenues that came in below estimates. Sales of its Surface tablets and laptops slumped in the face